Cardwell, Ohio, October of 1974. The first cold snap had come in overnight, and the frost was still on the truck glass when Ray Petrak red-tagged a batch of brake drums that should never have left the foundry. He was 52 years old. He had been a brakeman for 26 of those years, and in all that time his red tag had never once told a lie. That morning the foreman walked over, peeled the tag off with 2 fingers, and dropped it in the trash can like it was a gum wrapper. Ray didn't argue. That was the thing about Ray. He never argued. 3 days later, those same brakes were bolted onto a commuter bus, and that bus went off the Route 62 grade into a cornfield. And when the company came looking for a name to hang it on, the foreman gave them Ray's. Said it to the owner. Said it to the insurance man. Said it in front of the whole floor, a dozen men standing there with their coffee going cold. He's just a grease monkey. He signed off, not me. But here is what nobody in that room knew. Ray Petrak kept a little cassette recorder in the open tray of his toolbox. An old habit. He used it for parts lists. And the afternoon the foreman gave the order to ship those bad brakes, that toolbox was standing open 2 feet away. And the tape was running. He didn't play it. Not yet. He just waited. If you have ever been called a nobody by the very man who was setting you up to take his fall. If you have ever stood there quiet while someone with a nicer title stole your good name right off your back, then I'm telling you, this story is for you. Stay with me to the end. You are going to want to see how this one lands. Before we go on, do me one small thing. Tap that subscribe button, because these are the stories the big channels won't tell you. And down in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every one of them. Go ahead. I'll wait. All right. Let me take you back to the beginning. Cardwell sat in the Mahoning Valley, a mill town going a little gray at the edges. The kind of place where everybody knew whose father had worked at the plant and whose hadn't. Ashland Fleet and Brake was on the north end, past the rail spur, a long brick building with a corrugated roof that rang like a drum when it rained. Inside, it smelled like brake dust and hot metal and old coffee, and it had smelled that way for 40 years. Ray had worked there for 26 of them. He came in when Walt Ashland's father still ran the place. He took the graveyard shift for 20 years, because somebody had to, and because a widower with no children waiting up has no reason not to. He trained half the men on that floor. Some of them had gone on to better pay in bigger cities. Some of them had gone on to be his boss. Ray never said a word about that either. He had a creed, if you could call it that. He said it plain, the way another man might say the weather looked like rain. He'd tap the red tag hanging off a finished set of brakes, and he'd say, "That's not a piece of paper, kid. That's a promise. That's me telling a mother in a station wagon her car is going to stop when she stands on the pedal." He believed it. Every man on that floor knew he believed it. When Ray Petrak's initials were on a brake job, you could put your family in that vehicle and drive it through the mountains and sleep like a baby. His wife's name was Ellen. She'd been gone 3 years. Cancer, the fast kind, from finding it to burying her in under 5 months. After that, the shop was pretty much all Ray had, and he leaned on it like a man leans on a cane. He had a little brick house 19 months from being paid off. He had a pension 19 months from vesting full. 19 months. That number matters. Hold on to it. Now, into all this comes Dale Coyle. Coyle was 44, and he was the foreman, and 6 years back he had gotten that job over Ray. Everybody knew it should have been Ray's. Ray knew the work better. Knew it in his hands, knew it in his sleep. But Coyle knew how to talk to the men in the front office. He knew how to make a schedule look good on paper. He knew how to shave a nickel off a job and call it efficiency. And the front office liked that. So Coyle got the office with the glass window that looked out over the floor, and Ray got a bench. Coyle wasn't a big man. That's worth saying. Small power, worn like a big coat. He walked the floor with a clipboard the way some men walk with a gun, and he had a way of standing just a little too close when he wanted you to feel his rank. He wanted to be plant foreman someday. He wanted the bonus. He wanted the front office to look at him and see a man going up. And the thing about a man like that is he is always certain he is the smartest one in the room. That fall, Ashland landed the big one, a $38,500 contract to recondition the brake fleet for Valley Coach lines. Buses, real money. The kind of money that could set the shop up for 2 more years. But the deadline was tight, and Coyle's bonus rode on hitting quota, and from the day that contract came in, you could see something change in the way he moved. Faster, meaner, watching the numbers instead of the work. Let me show you something small before it all goes wrong, because it matters later. Ray, when he worked, would talk to himself. Not crazy. He'd dictate. He kept a little pocket cassette recorder in the top tray of his toolbox, lit up, and while he worked he'd thumb it on and say his parts orders out loud. 2 sets shoe springs, left rear, forward the Grumman job, need retainer clips by Thursday. Things like that. He'd been doing it for years. His eyes weren't what they were, and he didn't trust his own handwriting on a greasy pad. The younger men teased him for it. Danny especially. Ray's making his radio show again, they'd say. And Ray would just smile and keep talking into the little machine. Nobody thought a thing about it. It was furniture. It was part of the bench, like the vise and the parts washer. Remember the recorder. Everything turns on the recorder. Now, Danny. Danny Reyes was 19, and Ray had taken him on as an apprentice about a year back. Good hands, once you slowed them down. Scared of doing it wrong, which Ray liked, because a man who's scared of doing brakes wrong is a man who does brakes right. Danny needed the job. It was the only one he had, and there wasn't another one waiting in Cardwell. He had a way of going quiet when Coyle came around, of finding something on the bench to stare at. Ray noticed that. Ray noticed most things. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Ray was checking a batch of Reline shoes that had come back from the bonding oven, and he found the bonding was bad. You could see it if you knew what to look for, the lining sitting just proud of the shoe. A hair of a gap where the adhesive hadn't taken. On a brake, a hair is everything. A hair is the difference between stopping and not stopping. So Ray did what he always did. He pulled the batch, and he wired a red tag through the first one, and he wrote the reason on it in his blocky little hand. Bad bond. Reline, Coyle came out of his office with the clipboard. "What's this? Bonding's bad on the whole lot," Ray said. "They came out of the oven short. Needs to go back." Coyle picked up one of the shoes, turned it over. He was not looking at the bond. Ray could tell he was not looking at the bond. He was looking at the clock on the wall and the numbers on his clipboard. "Looks fine to me." "It's not fine." "Run your thumbnail along the heel there. You feel that lift? That's air." And Coyle set the shoe down, and he reached over, and he took hold of Ray's red tag, and he pulled it off the wire slow so Ray could watch him do it. Then he crumpled it in his fist and dropped it on the floor. "You know what your problem is, Ray?" He wasn't loud. This part was just the two of them. "You're just a grease monkey. I do the thinking around here. You do the turning of the wrenches. That's the arrangement." He tapped the batch. "These ship." And he walked back to his office. Ray stood there a second. Then he bent down, and he picked up the torn red tag off the floor, and he put it in the chest pocket of his coveralls. He didn't say anything. He didn't slam anything. He just kept it. That was Ray. He figured the work spoke for itself. He figured a man like Coyle would trip over his own feet eventually, and decency would be seen. Because it always had been. That was Ray's blind spot, right there, and it was about to cost him everything he had. Because decency doesn't get seen. Not on its own. You have to make it seen. Ray hadn't learned that yet. 2 days later, Coyle made his point again, and this time he made it in front of the boy. Ray had slowed the line. Not much. He'd caught a batch of drums with a casting flaw and pulled 6 of them, and pulling 6 drums means the men down the line stand around for 20 minutes while replacements come up. Coyle came out with a pink slip in his hand, one of the dock slips, and he walked right up to Ray's bench where Danny was standing with a torque wrench in his fist. "Half a day," Coyle said, and he laid the slip on the bench. "For slowing my line. You want to send bad drums out on a bus? That's on you," Ray said. "I'm not signing off on cracked castings. I'm docking you half a day," Coyle said again, louder now, because he wanted Danny to hear it. He wanted the boy to see the shape of things. Who was boss? Who could take money out of whose pocket with a stroke of a pen? "And I'll do it again tomorrow if you slow my line again. You understand me? You're here to turn wrenches. Turn them faster." Then he was gone, back behind the glass. Danny didn't say anything. He was looking hard at the torque wrench like there was scripture written on it. His face had gone red for Ray, the way a young man's does when he sees something he knows is wrong and hasn't yet found the nerve to name. Ray put a hand on his shoulder. "Just for a second. Keep your eyes open, kid," he said. "Quiet. Just for the 2 of them. That's the whole job, not the wrench. The eyes. You keep your eyes open, and you remember what you see." He picked up the dock slip and folded it once and put it in the same pocket as the red tag. Sooner or later, that's the whole job. Danny nodded. He didn't understand yet what he was being told. He would. Now the contract deadline came down like a hammer. Coyle was behind. Way behind. He'd promised the front office numbers he couldn't hit clean, and Valley Coach wanted their buses back on the road. And the only way to hit quota was to stop pulling bad parts. So Coyle went to the racks himself. He found the batches Ray had flagged. 34 brake assemblies wired with Ray's red tags. Cracked drums. Bad bonding. The whole rejected lot, sitting in quarantine where Ray had put them. And Coyle got a grease pencil, and he marked them to ship. That's when it stopped being a mean foreman and started being something that could get people killed. The last straw came on a Friday, and it came in front of everyone. The whole crew was on the floor, near shift change, a dozen men or more. Coyle came out with the shipping paperwork and a pen, and he walked up to Ray's bench and put the clipboard down. "I need you to sign this batch clean," he said. "The Valley Coach assemblies. Sign the QC, and we ship tonight." Ray looked at the batch numbers on the sheet. He knew them. Every one. They were his flagged sets, the cracked drums, the bad bonds. 34 of them. "Those are the ones I red-tagged," Ray said. "Every one of those is a reject. I'm not signing those clean." "That's not a difference of opinion, Dale. That's cracked castings going out under buses full of people." And here's the thing you have to understand. Ray, in that same minute, without thinking about it, just out of 20 years of habit, had thumbed on the recorder in his toolbox. He was about to dictate the batch numbers, the way he always did before a dispute, so he'd have his own record. The little machine was running, lid up, 2 feet away, nobody looking at it. It was furniture. Coyle straightened up. And now he got loud, because the whole floor was watching, and he wanted the whole floor to learn the lesson. "You're just a grease monkey," he said. Loud, flat, every man on that floor heard it. "You sign the tag, or you clock out for good. Those are your 2 doors. Pick one." The shop went quiet. Just the compressor cycling somewhere in the back. Ray looked at him a long moment. Then he set the pen down on the clipboard. Gentle, without a sound. He took his coveralls off the hook. and he walked to the time clock, and he punched his card, and he went out the side door into the cold. He would not sign. 26 years. And he clocked out rather than put his name on a promise he knew was a lie. And the men watched him go, and not one of them said a word. Because Coyle signed their checks too. But the recorder was still running, and after the door shut behind Ray, Coyle turned to the shipping hand, a kid named Foster, and he said the words that were going to end him. He didn't know he was saying them into anything. Why would he? The grease monkey was gone. "Ship it," Coyle said. "The whole batch. Tonight, and anybody asks, anybody, Petrak passed it. You got that?" Petrak signed off. Then he walked back to his office, feeling like a man who'd won something. 2 feet away, in the tray of an open toolbox, a little wheel of tape turned, and caught every word. Nobody registered it. Not Foster, not the crew, not Coyle, not even Ray, out in the parking lot with his heart going, sitting in his cold truck. He'd forgotten he'd even switched it on. That's how these things happen. The whole world turns on something nobody's looking at. 3 days later, on the Route 62 grade, a Valley Coach commuter bus lost its brakes. It was the early run, maybe 15 people aboard, headed down the long hill toward the county road. The driver was a man named Hollis, 20 years on that route. He came into the grade and put his foot down, and the pedal went to the floor. Nothing. He pumped it. Nothing. Those cracked drums had done exactly what cracked drums do under heat and load. They'd let go. Now, I'll tell you straight, because I don't traffic in the worst thing that could happen. Hollis was good. He kept his head. He couldn't stop that bus, so he steered it, worked it down through the gears, rode the engine, and when the road bent he took it off the shoulder and put it into a cornfield, long and flat, and let the soft ground and the standing corn drag it down until it stopped. It threw everybody around. Bags came off the racks. One woman came away with a sprained wrist. That was the whole butcher's bill. 1 sprained wrist. Everybody walked out of that cornfield on their own 2 feet. But it could have been the whole busload. Everybody who saw the skid marks knew it could have been the whole busload. And that's the thing that made the debt unforgivable. Not what happened. What almost happened. The state safety board opened a case. Valley Coach's insurer wanted a cause, in writing, with a name on it. And the $38,000 contract froze solid overnight. Ashland Fleet and Brake had a bus in a cornfield with its name on the work order, and somebody was going to have to answer for it. And Dale Coyle moved first. That's what a certain kind of man does. He doesn't wait to be accused. He accuses. By the time the safety board man came to the shop, the QC paperwork on those 34 assemblies had Ray Petrak's initials on the clean sign-off line. R.P. Right where it needed to be. Coyle had swapped the carbon, forged the line, done whatever he had to do. And it was easy, wasn't it? Because Ray's initials were on 10,000 honest jobs in that building. What was one more set? In the wrong place. And Coyle stood in front of Walt Ashland, and the Valley Coach insurance man, and the safety board investigator, and half the floor drifting close enough to hear, and he named Ray. "I flagged concerns myself," Coyle said, "smooth as you please. But Petrak's the QC man on that line. 26 years. He signed them clean. It's his initials on the sheet. I trusted him." A little shake of the head, sorrowful, maybe he's slipping. It happens to a man his age. But he signed off, not me. He's just a grease monkey with a stamp. And the stamp said clean. There it was, the frame. Neat as a folded shirt. Because who was the front office going to believe? A foreman with a glass office and a good way of talking? Or a bench mechanic, a widower, a man who'd already clocked out mad in front of the whole crew 3 days before the crash, which now looked, didn't it, like guilt? like a man who knew he'd let something bad go out the door. Ray was the fall guy, chosen, designated, and delivered. And there is nothing lonelier in this world than being the one everybody has already decided to blame. They suspended him. Pending the hearing. 26 years and a pension 19 months out, and a name that had never once told a lie, all of it hanging on a hearing where the only piece of paper anybody had said he'd done it. I won't rush past what that did to him, because it's the truest part. Ray went home to the little brick house that was 19 months from paid off, and he sat at Ellen's kitchen table in the dark, and he did not know what to do. This was a man who had always believed the work spoke for itself. That was the rock he'd stood on his whole life. Do it right, and being right will be enough. And now he was learning, at 52, in one cold week, that it isn't enough. That a man can do everything right for 26 years, and a smaller man can take it all away in an afternoon with a grease pencil and a good lie. The town started to look at him sideways. That was the part that cut. At the diner on Saturday, conversations got quiet when he came in. A man he'd known 20 years suddenly had to study his eggs. Somebody's kid had been on a bus once, hadn't they? And here was the man who'd sent bad breaks out under it. That's what they thought they knew. And Ray couldn't fix it, because the only thing louder than a lie is a lie with a signature on it, and the signature said his name. He didn't sleep. He'd get up at 3 and stand in the dark kitchen. He thought about Ellen. He thought about what she'd have said. She'd have said, "Raymond, you didn't do it, so quit sitting there taking the blame like a coat you were handed." But he didn't know how to take it off. Being wronged and being able to prove it are two different countries, and Ray was stuck at the border with no papers. It went on like that for the better part of 2 weeks. The pain of it. The sideways looks. The hearing coming closer like a train you can hear before you can see it. And then one night, he decided to clean out his toolbox. That's all it was. A man who's about to lose everything, doing the small ordered thing. Because the small ordered thing is the only thing left he can control. He was going to bring his tools home before somebody at the shop decided a suspended man's toolbox was company property. So he drove out there in the evening, before the hearing barred him for good, and he opened the box and started laying things out on the bench. The wrenches he'd had for 30 years. The vernier his father gave him, and in the top tray, under a rag, the little cassette recorder. He picked it up. And he stood there, with it in his hand, and something moved at the back of his mind. A cold little thought. When had he last used it? And then it came to him, the whole afternoon, the batch numbers, the clipboard, thumbing the machine on out of habit. He'd been about to dictate those batch numbers when Coyle got loud. The recorder had been running. It had been running when he walked out the door. His hands weren't quite steady. He rewound it. He didn't know how far. He pressed play, his own voice first, tinny, saying a parts number. Then the sound of the floor, the compressor, footsteps, and then Coyle's voice, clear as a bell. Clear as if the man were standing right there in the empty shop with him. "You're just a grease monkey. You sign the tag or you clock out for good." Ray's jaw tightened. He kept the tape running. The door on the tape. His own footsteps walking out. A pause. And then Coyle again, to the shipping hand. Not knowing, never dreaming. Ship it. The whole batch. Tonight. And anybody asks. Anybody. Petrak passed it. "You got that?" Petrak signed off. Click. Ray stood in that empty shop for a long time. The compressor cycled once and went quiet, and something changed in his face. You'd have had to know him to see it. The pain didn't leave exactly, but underneath it, something else came up and set, hard, like concrete going off. Not rage. Ray never went to rage. Something colder and steadier than rage. Resolve, because he understood now, finally, the thing he'd been too decent to understand his whole life. The work does not speak for itself. Decency is not seen on its own. You have to make it seen. And here, in his hand, weighing about half a pound, was the tool to make it seen. And here is where a smaller man ruins it. Here is where 9 men out of 10 ruin it. A smaller man drives to Coyle's house that night and pounds on the door and waves the tape in his face. A smaller man plays it in the parking lot for the crew the next morning, hot, shaking, needing to be believed right now. And Coyle, because Coyle is clever. Remember, Coyle does the thinking. Coyle says it's doctored. Says it's out of context. Says the grease monkey spliced it together out of spite because he got docked, and he has the tape confiscated as company property and it disappears, and Ray has played his one card into a stacked deck and lost it. Ray didn't do that. Ray drove home, and he sat at Ellen's kitchen table, and he thought it through the way he'd think through a brake job. Slow, in order. Every step. He found a friend with a second tape machine, and he made a copy. One copy. He put the original in a coffee can in the crawl space of his house, and the copy someplace else. Someplace no one who searched the first place would think to look. 2 tapes, 2 places. Then he sat down and he wrote a plain, polite letter to the safety board and to Walt Ashland saying he would attend the formal hearing, and that he intended to speak, and that he had evidence. He did not say what the evidence was. That was the whole thing. That was the move that turned a wronged man into a dangerous one. He did not tell Coyle what he had. He let Coyle keep on being certain. He let Coyle keep on thinking a grease monkey couldn't outthink him, because that certainty, that arrogance, was the last part Ray needed. And he wasn't going to spend it early. Coyle had chosen the room once, on the floor, in front of everybody, when he called Ray a nobody. Now Ray was going to choose the room. He was going to choose the witnesses. He was going to choose the moment. And he was going to play the tape when it could not be taken back, in front of the exact people who'd heard him blamed. The silence began that night, at the kitchen table, over a cold cup of coffee. And it was the loudest thing Ray Petrak ever did. He mailed the letter in the morning. And Dale Coyle, who thought he'd already won, who was already telling the front office how the hearing would go, had no idea that the quiet man he'd called a grease monkey had just set a trap and baited it with his own patience, and that every single day Coyle kept talking, kept bragging, kept being sure he was walking a little further into it. But Coyle was about to get nervous. Because a man who's been framed is supposed to shout. A man who's been framed is supposed to come at you. And Ray Petrak wasn't doing either one. Ray Petrak had gone quiet as a church, and he'd said he had evidence. And he'd said he was coming to the hearing. And that kind of quiet, from a man you've wronged, that's the kind of quiet that keeps a guilty man up at night. Coyle started to wonder just exactly what was on that bench that afternoon. He started to wonder what a man with a recorder might have running. And the next morning, before the floor filled up, Dale Coyle let himself into the shop early, and he walked over to Ray Petrak's toolbox, and he started going through it. He went through it slow at first, then not slow at all. Coyle lifted the top tray out and set it on the bench. He ran his hand under the wrenches. He shook the coffee-stained rag loose and let it drop. He picked up the parts ledger and thumbed it and put it down. He was looking for something small, something square, something that fit in a shirt pocket. He didn't find it, because it wasn't there. The cassette recorder was gone from the top tray. The little machine the men had teased Ray about for years, the one he mumbled his parts lists into like an old man talking to himself, it wasn't in the toolbox anymore. It wasn't anywhere on that floor. Ray had taken it home the same night he understood what it held. Coyle stood there a while with his hands on the edge of the bench. The shop was cold and gray, that early. The furnace hadn't caught up yet. He could see his own breath. and for the first time since he'd peeled that red tag off in front of Ray, Dale Coyle felt something turn over in his gut that he couldn't name and didn't like. He put the tray back. He tried to put it back the way it was. But a man can't unremember that he looked. He told himself it was nothing. Told himself a grease monkey didn't have anything. Told himself the quiet was just a beat man giving up. That's what he wanted it to be. He walked back to his office and shut the door and got himself a cup of coffee, and his hand wasn't as steady as he'd have liked. Ray, meanwhile, was at his kitchen table. Same table. Cold coffee, same as the night before. And the cassette recorder sat in front of him, and next to it sat a second little machine he'd borrowed from the pawn shop over on 3rd, and a fresh, blank tape still in its wrapper. He wasn't going to trust one copy. He'd been in this trade too long to trust one of anything. You always keep the carbon. You always keep the spare. A man who fixes brakes knows there's no such thing as a single point holding the whole load. You build it so if one thing fails, another catches. So he made the copy. He sat and listened to the whole thing play, low, into the second machine, and he heard Coyle's voice come out of the little speaker, plain as day. "Ship it." "Anybody asks." Petrak passed it. He heard it, and his jaw went tight, and he made himself sit still and let it record clean. No bumps, no thumbs on the mic. When it was done, he had 2 tapes. The original went into a coffee can, and the coffee can went into the crawl space under the house, back behind the pipe where a man would have to know to look. The copy went somewhere else. Somewhere he told nobody. Not the crawl space. Not the shop. A second place. Separate. Because if they ever found one, he wanted the other one breathing. Then he did the thing that scared Dale Coyle more than any shouting ever could have. He wrote a letter. Plain paper. Plain hand. He didn't accuse anybody in it. He didn't call Coyle a liar. He just wrote that he had evidence bearing on the Route 62 matter, and that he intended to present it at the hearing, and that he'd be there. He mailed 1 copy to the State Safety Board. He mailed 1 copy to Walt Ashland. And then he went quiet. That was the whole move. Quiet, and a promise of proof, and a date on the calendar. Because here is the thing Ray had figured out at that cold kitchen table. If he walked into the shop and played the tape at Coyle, one-on-one, Coyle would smile and take it, and it would disappear, and it would be Ray's word again about what a tape had said, and a foreman beats a grease monkey every time in that argument. If he mailed the tape to the board, some clerk files it, and it becomes a piece of paper in a stack, and lawyers get at it, and it gets soft. No, the tape had to go off in a room, in front of the exact people who heard him, blamed. At the moment, it could not be taken back. So he waited. And the waiting worked on Coyle like water on rust. Because a framed man is supposed to shout. And Ray had gone quiet as a church. Coyle started making mistakes. Little ones. He came in early 3 more mornings and went through the shop like he'd lost his wedding ring. He asked Foster, the shipping hand, twice whether Petrak had said anything to anybody. He got sharp with the men over nothing. And one afternoon he did the thing that told Ray the trap was working. He searched Ray's bench again. In the open this time, in front of Danny Reyes. Not even pretending anymore. Danny watched him do it. Danny watched the foreman pull a beat man's toolbox apart, looking for something a beat man was supposed to be too dumb to have. And something moved in the kid that day. He didn't say anything. He'd learned that much from Ray. Keep your eyes open, that's the whole job. But he saw it. He filed it. Coyle, panicking, digging through the box of a man he'd already destroyed. You don't dig like that for nothing. You dig like that when you know there's something to find. While Coyle dug, Ray built. He wasn't idle in that silence. People thought he was beaten, sitting home suspended with his name in the mud. He wasn't beaten. He was assembling. First thing he pulled was the shipping log. Now, a suspended man can't walk into the shop and ask for records. But Ray had trained half that floor, and there were men who still tipped their cap to him in the diner, and one of them got him a look at the copy of the Valley Coach Manifest, the timestamp on when that batch of 34 assemblies left the dock. Ray held that timestamp up next to the tape in his mind, and they matched. The recording, the order, the ship out, all of it lined up on the same afternoon, to the same hour. The tape didn't just say a thing. The paper proved when the thing happened. Second thing was the carbon. Now this is where 26 years of habit paid a man back. Ray Petrak red-tagged a lot of parts in his life, and every single time he tore a tag off a bad assembly, he kept the carbon copy. His own filing system, a shoebox in the closet, tags going back years, each one dated in his own hand. And in that shoebox was the carbon for the batch of 34, the cracked drums, the bad bonding, dated 3 days before the bus went into the corn. His copy. His writing. Proof that he'd flagged the exact parts that failed before they ever shipped. Coyle had forged Ray's initials onto a clean sign-off sheet. But Coyle didn't have Ray's shoebox. Coyle didn't know it existed, and a forged sign-off falls apart fast when the same man's got a dated red tag saying the opposite, kept in his own hand, filed the day it happened. The tape was the voice. The log was the clock. The carbon was the paper. 3 things, 3 different kinds, all pointing the same direction. That's not a grease monkey's word anymore. That's a case. And then there was Danny. Danny was the 4th thing, and Danny was the one Ray couldn't build. A tape you can copy, a log you can find, a carbon you can keep, but a 19-year-old kid finding the nerve to stand up in a room full of grown men and say what he saw the foreman do. That Ray couldn't manufacture. That one the kid had to find in himself. So Ray didn't push him. He never once asked Danny to testify. He knew what asking would do. It'd put the whole weight of it on a kid who could lose the only job he had. Instead, one evening, Danny came by the house on his own, stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, the way a young man does when he's carrying something heavy and doesn't know how to set it down. "I saw him," Danny said. "The paperwork. I saw Coyle swap the carbon. I didn't know what I was looking at the time. But I know now." Ray looked at the kid a long moment. "You don't have to say anything, Danny. A man's got to eat. I'm not going to ask you to bleed for me. You didn't ask." Danny's voice cracked a little, and he set it straight. "You told me the whole job was keeping your eyes open. Well, I kept 'em open." Ray didn't answer that. He just nodded, slow, and put a hand on the kid's shoulder, and that was the whole conversation. But Loop B, the one that opened the day Coyle docked Ray a half day to show a boy who was boss, that loop closed right there on the porch, quiet, in the cold. Now the company would have liked all this to just go away, because Walt Ashland had gotten Ray's letter too. And Walt Ashland was a decent man in a distant sort of way, but he was also a man with a frozen contract and an insurer breathing down his neck, and a foreman he'd trusted for 6 years telling him it was all under control. And a letter from a suspended beat man saying he had evidence. That was a loose bolt in a machine Walt wanted to hold together. So the offer came. And Coyle, of all people, was the one they sent to make it. He drove out to Ray's house on a Tuesday, sat in his car a minute before he came up the walk, and Ray watched him through the screen door doing it. Then Coyle came up on the porch with a paper in his hand and that foreman's smile that never quite reached the eyes. "Ray," he said, "we've been friends a long time." They had not been friends a long time. "Company wants to make this easy on you," Coyle said. $1,850. You resign, quiet, the sign-off error stands, on paper, but you walk with cash in your pocket and no hearing, no ugliness. You go find something else. Fresh start. He held the paper out. "That's a lot of money for a man in your spot." Ray didn't take the paper. He looked at it in Coyle's hand, and then he looked at Coyle. "$18.50, Ray said. "Cash. For my name." Coyle's smile tightened just a hair. "For your signature on a resignation. Come on, Ray. Be smart. You fight this, you lose the hearing, you lose the pension, you lose everything, and you got nothing to show for it. Take the money. You know how this goes. A foreman's word against a, and here Coyle caught himself, but not quite in time, against a beat man's. You know who they believe, a grease monkeys, Ray said. Quiet, that's the word you want. Say it. Coyle didn't say it, he just held the paper. And Ray Petrak looked at $1,850, which was real money, which was a chunk of the 19 months still owed on the house, which was the easy road out of the mud, and he shook his head, one time, slow. "No," he said. "I don't think so." "Ray, you should get off my porch now, Dale," and Coyle went. But before he got to his car he turned around, and the smile was gone, and what was under it came out plain. "You're going to lose everything, you dumb old man. 26 years and you're going to walk away with nothing. Over pride. You could have had the money." Ray stood in the doorway and didn't answer. And that non-answer sat with Coyle the whole drive back, because every time Ray Petrak said nothing, it cost Dale Coyle a little more sleep. Each time Ray refused, the payoff got bigger. That's how it works. Every dollar he turned down, every threat he let roll off, was interest paid into the thing coming. He didn't know the exact shape of it yet. But he knew you don't take the small money when you're holding the big card. You wait for the room. Coyle was done waiting. Coyle decided if he couldn't buy Ray out of the room, he'd keep him out of it. The day before the hearing, Ray got a letter of his own. Not from the board this time. From the company. Formal termination, not suspended anymore. Fired, cause listed. Insubordination. And the letter said, in the flat language these things use, that Ray Petrak was barred from Ashland Fleet and Brake property effective immediately, and that any attempt to enter would be treated as trespass. Coyle had gotten him fired so he couldn't come to the hearing. Fired him off the property so the tape would never make it into the room. And Coyle came by one more time, didn't get out of the car this time, just rolled the window down at the end of the drive as Ray came out to the mailbox. "Hearing's tomorrow, Ray," he called. "Shame you can't make it. Company property now. You show up, they call the sheriff. I'd hate for it to end with you in a cell." And he grinned, and he was sure, he was so sure, and he drove off. That night was the worst of it. Because that night Ray went down into the crawl space to check the original, and he ran it. Just to hear it, just to be sure. And the machine jammed. The old recorder, the one that had caught it all, chewed the tape. He heard the little motor bind and whine, and he got the light on it fast, and his hands weren't steady. A quarter-inch of tape pulled out and creased. He sat down there in the dirt under his own house, with a dead flashlight going yellow, and thought, for one long black minute, that he'd lost it. That the whole thing was gone. That Coyle had won after all, not by finding the tape, but by sheer dumb luck, a bad spring in a $10 machine. But he had the copy. He'd made the copy for exactly this. 2 tapes, 2 places, because there's no such thing as a single point holding the whole load. He got up out of the dirt, and he brushed himself off, and he went and got the copy from the second place. The place he'd told nobody, and it was fine. Clean, Coyle's voice still on it, plain as the day it was said, and he had the carbon, and he had the log, and the night before the hearing, Danny had told him he'd stand up. So Coyle had fired him off the property. Fine. There was one thing Coyle hadn't counted on. Because Coyle didn't think about people like they mattered. The union steward. Ray called the steward that night. And the steward, A heavy-set man named Pohl, who'd known Ray 20 years, listened to the whole thing quiet and then said one sentence that undid Coyle's last move. "They can fire you, Ray. They can't gag you. You got a right to be heard at a safety board hearing on a matter you're named in, on property or off. And if they try to keep you out, I'll have the board and the local down there so fast Walt Ashland won't know what hit him. You be there at 9. You'll get in that room." Ray was there at 9. The hearing was in the front office, the long conference room with the windows that looked out onto the floor. Cold light coming through them, the gray of a Cardwell October morning. Walt Ashland sat at the head of the table, gray himself, tired. Down one side sat the man from Valley Coach's insurer with his folder, and beside him Merrill, the state safety board investigator, a lean, careful man who wrote everything down. Pohl the steward sat near Ray. And Coyle. Coyle stood, because Coyle always stood, up near the head of the table by Walt, in a clean shirt, confident. A foreman in his element. Danny stood against the back wall. Nobody paid him much mind. Just an apprentice, holding up the plaster. And Ray sat down at the far end with a pocket recorder in front of him on the table, and he folded his hands, and he waited his turn. They let Coyle talk first, of course. The foreman, the man with the standing. And Coyle talked smooth. He was good at it. He walked them through the paperwork, the sign-off sheet with Ray's forged initials, and he shook his head sorrowful over it, and he said the words he'd been saying for weeks. "Look, I don't like saying it. Ray's been here a long time. But the man's 52, he's slowing down, and the plain fact is he signed off on that batch and he shouldn't have. His initials are right there. I wish it were different. But you can't have a grease monkey passing bad brakes and then crying about it when a bus goes off the road. Somebody could have died out on 62. That's on the man who signed the tag. He said it right to the insurer. He said it looking at Walt. And it landed, you could see it land, heads nodding. Because it fit what they already believed. Then Merrill, the board man, turned to the far end of the table and said, "Mr. Petrak, you asked to be heard. You wrote you had evidence." "I do," Ray said. "Then let's have it." Ray didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He reached out one grease-scarred hand, and he pressed the button on the little machine on the table, and Dale Coyle's own voice came out of it into that silent room. "Ship it. Anybody asks, Petrak passed it." Nobody breathed. Ray let it run. There was a little more, the hum of the shop behind it, and then Coyle again, clearer, that same afternoon, telling Foster the shipping hand the same thing in the same words. And then Ray reached out and pressed stop. The room was dead quiet. You could hear the furnace tick. Then Ray reached into his coat, and he laid two more things on the table, side by side, slow, the way you set down tools you've used 1,000 times. The red tag carbon, dated in his own hand, 3 days before the wreck, flagging the exact batch. And the shipping log, the timestamp on it matching the tape to the hour. "That's my writing," Ray said, tapping the carbon. "Dated, the day I flagged them. That's the log, when they shipped. Same afternoon as what you just heard. And that," he nodded at the recorder, "is the man who ordered them shipped, telling his shipping hand to put my name on it." He looked down the table at Coyle. And he said the thing he'd been holding since the cold kitchen table, and he said it flat, no heat in it at all, which is what made it land like it did. "You were right, Dale, I never did the thinking, I just kept the tape running." And then the room came apart. Coyle went first, and Coyle went the way guilty men go, fast and loud and in 3 directions at once. That's out of context," he said, and his voice was pitched too high. "You don't know what. That's from some other day, he spliced that together, that's not." He turned to Walt. "Walt, come on, you know me. The man's had weeks to cook this up. He doctored it. That's what he does. He's had that machine in his box for years, making his little recordings. You think that's even real?" He was sweating. The clean shirt didn't matter now. He forged it. The grease monkey forged a tape, that's what's happening here, and from the back wall, quiet, a 19-year-old voice. I watched you swap the carbon, Mr. Coyle. The whole room turned. Danny Reyes came off the wall. He was pale, and his hands were shaking, but his voice held. I was at the file cabinet the morning after the wreck. You pulled the sign-off sheet, and you put a new one in, and you wrote Ray's initials on it yourself. I saw you do it. I didn't say anything because I was scared of you. I'm not going to be scared of you anymore. He swallowed. He didn't sign off on those breaks. You did the opposite of that. You made it look like he did. Coyle stared at the kid like he'd been slapped. You don't know what you saw. I know exactly what I saw, Danny said. You taught me the job, Ray, keeping your eyes open. That's the whole job. And that was Coyle finished. Because a tape a lawyer might have called doctored, and a carbon a man might have called a fake, but a tape and a carbon and a log and an eyewitness, all four, pointing the same direction? There's no talking your way out of that. Coyle knew it. You could watch him know it. The bluster ran out of him all at once, like air out of a tire, and he just stood there, gray-faced, out of words, which for Dale Coyle was a kind of dying. Then Walt Ashland. Walt hadn't said anything through all of it. He'd just sat, listening, and his face had done a slow, terrible thing. The thing a man's face does when he understands, in real time, whose word he'd taken and what it had cost a good man. He'd trusted his foreman by reflex for 6 years. He'd let this happen inside his own company, with his own family name on the building. He turned to Ray first. Not to Coyle. To Ray. Ray, he said, and his voice wasn't steady. 26 years. Your father knew my father. He stopped, started again. I took his word. I never came and asked you. I'm ashamed of that. I want you to hear me say it. I am ashamed. Ray met his eyes and gave him one small nod. That was all. It was enough. Then Walt turned to Coyle, and the decency went out of his voice, and something harder came in. Dale, you're suspended. Effective this second. Don't touch anything on your way out. The board's going to want that paperwork. All of it. Exactly where it is. He looked at Merrill. The tape, the carbon, the log, it's all yours. Whatever you need from us, we'll open the books. I want this done right. Coyle opened his mouth one more time, and Walt said, not another word, and Coyle shut it. Then the insurer and Merrill, and this part was quieter, professional, but it was the part that gave Ray his life back. Merrill gathered the 3 items with careful hands, and he said to the room, in that flatboard man's voice, this reassigns cause. The sign-off attributed to Mr. Petrak is voided. It's a forgery, and we've got the maker on his own recording and a witness to the act. He looked at the insurer. Liability moves off the individual named in the file and onto the foreman who ordered the shipment against a documented red tag flag, and onto the process that let one man override a QC hold. The insurer was already writing. The frozen contract, the blame, the whole weight of it, it lifted off Ray Petrak in that sentence and settled where it belonged. And Danny stood against the wall, no longer holding it up, just standing, and something in the kid's face had changed for good. He'd found the nerve. He'd said what he saw. And the room had turned, and the truth had held. Because he'd opened his mouth. A 19-year-old learned, in one cold morning, that keeping your eyes open only means something if you're willing to say what you saw out loud. Ray gathered his coat. He'd been fired off the property the day before. Now he was the only man in the room whose name was clean. He didn't gloat. He didn't say another word to Coyle. He'd said the one word that mattered, and it was on a tape, and it would outlast all of them. He just picked up his little recorder, and he clicked it into his coat pocket. the same pocket he'd carried it in for 20 years, and he walked out into the gray Cardwell morning a free man. 10 months later, it was spring, and the mornings were warm again. Ray Petrak had his own shop now. A small place on the Cardwell Strip, cinder block and a good roll-up door, and his name over it. Plain letters. Not Ashland. His own. He'd taken the pension when it vested, 19 months came and went, and it was his, every dollar, restored with the record cleared, and he'd put a piece of it into a lift, and a good set of tools, and a coffee pot that worked, and he'd hung out his shingle to do the one thing he'd always done. Brakes, done right. This particular morning, the light was coming in gold through the open door, and there was a ball game on low on the tube radio on the shelf, the Indians losing early, the announcer easy and slow. Coffee steamed on the corner of the toolbox, and Ray had a drum up on the bench, and beside him stood Danny Reyes, 20 now, and Ray was showing him how to read a hairline crack you could barely see. "You feel it before you see it, half the time," Ray was saying. "Run your thumb light. There, feel that? I feel it. Now what do you do?" Danny grinned. "Red tag it. And keep the carbon." "And keep the carbon," Ray said. "Every time. Doesn't matter who tells you to ship it. You keep the carbon." On the wall over the bench, in a plain frame, hung a red QC tag, torn along one edge. The same one, or one like it, a torn red tag, framed like a diploma, which to Ray it was. They worked easy a while. Then a car pulled up out front, and a man got out, and it took Ray a second to place him, because he'd gotten smaller somehow. Dale Coyle. Blacklisted off every fleet line in the valley after the board finished, no shop would put him near a brake job, and word travels in a trade. He stood in the doorway, with his hands empty and his eyes not quite up. "Ray," he said. "Dale," Coyle worked his jaw a second. "I'm having a hard time finding work. You know how it is out there now, for me." He got it out slow, like it hurt. "I came to ask if you'd write me a reference. Say I'm a good hand. That's all. Just a few words on paper, one old shopman to another." Danny had gone still at the bench. The radio played low. Ray set down his thumb gauge. He looked at Coyle a long, level moment. No anger in it. None, just a man looking at another man plain. And then he said it. Quiet. The way he said everything that mattered. "I only vouch for men whose word I've heard, Dale." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Coyle stood there a second, and then he nodded, once, like a man taking a bill he knew was coming. And he turned and got back in his car and drove off, and that was the last time he came around. Ray picked his gauge back up. Now he said to Danny, like nothing had happened, "Where were we?" The crack. Down at Ashland, Walt had changed the rules. No foreman could override a red tag anymore. A QC hold went straight to the owner's desk, and the standard he'd written it into, the one posted on the shop wall, had Ray's name on it. The Petrak standard, the men called it. A tag holds until the man who wrote it clears it. It was, when you got down to it, the only thing Ray had ever asked for. His name on a tag, meaning a bus stops when it's supposed to. He finished showing Danny the drum. The coffee steamed. The ball game droned. And out the open door the town went by, ordinary and warm. A town that had looked at Ray Petrak sideways for a season and now tipped its cap again when he passed. A man's name on a tag is a promise. That's all it ever was. The loud ones make the noise and take the credit and cut the corners when they think nobody's listening. But the quiet ones keep the receipts. And when the room finally comes, the room they get to choose, they don't have to raise their voice at all. They just press play. If a quiet man ever kept a receipt that saved him, tell me the city you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this one traveled.